On March 13th, 1964, a woman was murdered outside her apartment building in New York City. It took 35 minutes. 38 of her neighbors heard it happen. Not one of them called the police. For decades, we called them monsters. But scientists who studied this case didn't find monsters. They found something much worse. They found us. Kitty Genovese was 28 years old. She worked as a bar manager in Queens and drove home alone most nights. On the night of March 13th, she parked her car about 100 feet from her front door. A man named Winston Mosley was waiting. He stabbed her twice in the back before she hit the ground. She screamed. Lights came on in the windows above her. Mosley looked up, saw them, and walked away. Kitty pulled herself to her feet and made it around the corner of the building. Mosley came back. He found her in the vestibule of a nearby building, stabbed her again, and left a second time. A neighbor finally called the police. It was too late. Kitty Genovese died before the ambulance arrived. The New York Times ran the story 2 weeks later under a headline that changed everything. 38 who saw murder didn't call the police. The story spread across the country. Editorials ran for months. Psychologists, priests, and politicians all asked the same question. What kind of people watch a woman die and do nothing? The answer the public settled on was simple. New Yorkers, urban decay, the death of community. Modern life had made people cold and indifferent and selfish. That was the story. And it was wrong. 2 psychologists at Columbia University read that New York Times article and had a completely different reaction. John Darley and Bib Latane weren't interested in condemning the neighbors. They wanted to understand them, because something about the story didn't add up. These weren't criminals. These weren't cruel people. These were ordinary men and women who heard a woman screaming and did nothing. And Darley and Latane had a theory about why. It wasn't cruelty, it was math. They called it diffusion of responsibility. The idea was simple. When one person witnesses an emergency, the entire moral weight of that emergency lands on them alone. The responsibility is theirs. There is no one else. But when 10 people witness the same emergency, that weight gets divided. Each person carries 1/10 of the burden, and 1/10 of the burden, it turns out, is light enough to do nothing with. The emergency doesn't change. The stakes don't change. The only thing that changes is how many people are watching. And somehow, that is enough to make decent people stand completely still. To test this, they ran an experiment. A participant was placed alone in a room and told they would be having a conversation with other students through an intercom system. One of the other voices on the line began having what sounded like a seizure. When participants believed they were the only one who could hear it, 85% of them got up immediately and went for help. When they believed there were 4 other people on the line, that number dropped to 31%. Same emergency, same person, same stakes. More witnesses meant less help, every time. But diffusion of responsibility was only half of it. Darley and Latane identified a second force operating at the same time. They called it pluralistic ignorance. In an ambiguous situation, people look to each other to figure out how to react. If nobody around you is panicking, you assume there's probably no reason to panic. You stay calm because they're staying calm. They stay calm because you're staying calm. And in the windows above Kitty Genovese, every neighbor who looked out and saw other lights on, other people watching, other people not moving, read that stillness as information. If it were really serious, someone would have done something already. And so nobody did. The experiment that proved this one was even simpler. A participant was placed in a waiting room, either alone or with 2 other people who were secretly part of the experiment. Smoke began seeping under the door. When alone, 75% of participants reported the smoke within 2 minutes. When seated with 2 calm, unresponsive strangers, that number dropped to 10%. The room filled with smoke. People sat in it. Because nobody else was moving. One participant later said he had assumed the smoke was part of the experiment. He sat in it for 6 minutes. He never moved. That detail didn't make the headline. But it probably should have. Here's what nobody tells you about the Kitty Genovese story. The New York Times got it wrong. The 38 witnesses number was an exaggeration. Later investigations found that most neighbors heard something but couldn't see what was happening. Some thought it was a domestic dispute. Some saw Mosley walk away and assumed it was over. 2 people did call the police. The calls weren't logged properly. The story that defined a generation's understanding of urban apathy was built on a number that wasn't accurate and a conclusion that wasn't earned. But here's the thing. The science it inspired was real. Darley and Latney ran their experiments, and the bystander effect was documented dozens of times across dozens of different situations. The story was wrong. The phenomenon was not. It has been replicated in subway stations and office buildings and online comment sections. In 2019, researchers found that social media bystanders behave exactly like physical ones. The more people who have seen a post about someone in crisis, the less likely any individual is to respond. The platform changes. The math doesn't. And what's strange is that we've built entire systems that make this worse. A post with 10,000 views feels like it has 10,000 potential helpers attached to it. So you keep scrolling. Someone else will handle it. Someone always does. Except the data says they don't. Think about the last time you scrolled past something that made you uncomfortable, a post that seemed wrong, a situation that felt off, a person who seemed like they might be struggling. You kept scrolling. Maybe you told yourself someone else would handle it, maybe you assumed it wasn't as serious as it looked, maybe you looked around at everyone else doing nothing and decided that was the correct response. You weren't being cruel, you were being human. That's the part that's hard to sit with. Darley and Latney spent years after their initial research trying to find the antidote, and they did find one. It's almost embarrassingly simple. Individuation. The moment you stop being part of a crowd and become a specific person with a specific name, the diffusion evaporates. Witnesses who were directly addressed, you in the red jacket, call an ambulance, helped immediately and without hesitation. The responsibility couldn't be shared anymore. It had a name attached to it. Yours. This is why emergency response training teaches one rule above everything else. Never shout for help into a crowd. Point at a specific person. Make eye contact. Say, you. The crowd disappears the moment one person in it has a name. In the windows above Kitty Genovese, 38 lights were on. 38 people looked out and saw each other looking. And in that collective gaze, the responsibility dissolved until there was nothing left of it. Not because they were monsters, because they were doing what humans do when the rules of a situation are unclear. They looked at everyone else and waited for someone to go first. Nobody did. Kitty Genovese died 100 feet from her front door. The bystander effect doesn't live in 1964. It doesn't live in New York. It lives in the specific moment when you see something wrong and think, surely someone else will handle this. That thought has a name now, and knowing its name is the only thing that makes you any different from the people in those windows.